right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today for our last session in our four-part series. I'm sure some more people will straggle in just a minute, so I'll keep letting people in. But in the meantime, the note catcher is in the chat, and we are going to go ahead and get started. Again, this is me. I'm Becca. I feel like I know y'all, and y'all probably already know all of these bullet points about me. So we're just going to keep it moving today. We have done 3 sessions already where we defined our approach to unfinished learning of foundational reading skills. We talked about assessing and diagnosing unfinished learning of foundational reading skills. Then last time, we made our plan and how we were going to respond to the data for the students who still had gaps, or for the whole class in the cases where we had whole class gaps. And then today we are continuing on the same theme, but pivoting a little bit to think about considerations for our older striving readers, so kids who are still struggling with some of these foundational skills. Could someone come off mute and read our objectives for us today?
I'll do it. Participants will understand what research says about proficient reading, recognize how to identify disfluent reading in older students, and understand how unfinished learning of phonics impacts fluency in older readers, understand how building breadth and depth of vocabulary and knowledge as well as fluency practice can support proficient reading, recognize the systems and structures needed to support addressing the needs of older striving students, and reflect on current practices for supporting striving older readers, and develop an action plan.
So as you can see, we have a lot to cover today. So we are going to just dive right in. This is probably going to be back to like the beginning session where it's more content heavy. So just know that as we get into it. So we are almost through our very quick getting started section. We are going to then look at a research-based approach to skilled reading, thinking back to some of the research we learned about in the first session. We'll then think about unfinished learning in our older readers. We'll go into some best practices for fluency practice and improving automaticity in decoding. We'll then look at building meaning through knowledge of and vocabulary, and then we'll wrap up. Some norms for today. First is to trust in the process. Some of this information may be different than what you already know. Some of it may really nail down some of the things you already know. Please trust in the process and what we're going to learn today, even if it challenges some of the thoughts that you have already. Approach this work as a learner. As I said, this is going to be a pretty content heavy session. So for some of us, this may be total review. For some of us, this may be brand new information. Come into it as a learner, learn as much as you can, and take as much back to your school as you can. As always, we create and maintain a safe space for professional learning. It's so important to me that we're able to be vulnerable and talk about the things that are going really well in our schools, as well as the things that aren't going so well, and challenge each other to grow a little bit more as we work together. And then, as always, use technology to enhance your learning. I know we're still in Zoom sessions all the time and learning through our computers, so do your best to stay engaged in the topic that we're working on together today. Again, we'll be here for just an hour and a half, so I know y'all have a million things to do in your schools, and so please take care of yourself as you need to, and hopefully we'll learn a lot together today. Here is the note catcher. I'm going to drop the link in the chat one more time in case you need it. It has lots of materials that we're going to use today, so make sure you have it available either on your screen or printed out. You'll know it's the right one because it'll say session 4 at the top. So make sure you have that, and when you have it open or printed, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. All right. We are going to get started with the content in our session today. So we're going to start today by taking a look at what research tells us about skilled reading. So to get started, we're going to look at some of that research in our research snapshot in the note catcher. We're going to read independently for about 3 minutes, all of the text on the first page of the note catcher. And as you're reading, let's go ahead and reflect on the 2 questions that are on the screen. They're also right after the research snapshot in your note catcher. What does this research indicate about factors that influence a student's proficiency in reading? And how does this research impact instruction? So we're going to take about 3 minutes to read, and then we'll come back together to reflect. All right, so by coming off mute or putting your thoughts in the chat, let's go ahead and share out some of our reflections on that research. What does the research indicate about the factors that influence a student's proficiency in reading? Can y'all hear me now? Let's see, can you hear me now? Yes, okay, perfect. So we're just reflecting together, sharing out our reflections. What does the research indicate about the factors that influence a student's proficiency in reading? You can put it in the chat or share out by coming off mute.
I was reading. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Nope.
If there's more than one person in your room that's off mute, that's sometimes why that happens.
Okay. Is this better? Nope. Okay. I noticed that if students have a higher proficiency in reading comprehension, it's because the vocabulary is also higher, depending on their vocabulary. So the vocabulary and the reading comprehension are very comparable in where they're at in reading.
Yes, we see in the research that vocabulary and reading comprehension are closely linked. Ah. Anybody else want to come off mute and see if we can hear without some echo? I can voice over what's in the chat here. So y'all called out all of the important pieces in our research snapshot today. One that I think can't be overstated enough is that students need time in complex on grade level texts to be able to comprehend those types of texts and be able to read them with fluency. So I think that's something that can be overlooked and some a practice that we've gone away from and we need to go back towards. We also know that fluency and comprehension have a direct correlation, and with practice, we can improve students' ability to fluently read pretty quickly. Awesome. So we are going to look back at some of our models of proficient reading that we went over in the beginning of our time together. So you may have noticed that these research snapshots, what they tell us aligns to these two models that we've previously discussed. Proficient readers are able to recognize words with increasing automaticity, which as we know is the word recognition strand, while also applying their comprehension of language to make meaning of the text, as we see in the language comprehension strand. Remember that these two strands weave together. So if one is weak, it weakens the whole rope, which we know means weakens proficiency of reading. So as we take a look at older striving readers, we must also attend to these factors that contribute to fluent proficient reading so that we can provide the appropriate supports for our readers. We'll also look at the importance of using complex grade level text, as we just talked about from the research snapshot, when building proficient readers. So we are going to do a quick activity in the next section that will help us be able to feel what it feels like to be a disfluent reader. For this activity, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a disfluent reader. So let's take a minute on mute to read the poem on the screen. Even if you've looked ahead in your note catcher and have seen all of the words in this poem, let's just put that knowledge away for a minute so that we can really put ourselves in the shoes of a disfluent reader. So let's take about a minute to read this poem. And now in the chat or by coming off mute, go ahead and chat out, what do you think this poem is describing?
I did read ahead, but when I read it like this, what comes to mind is like a flag.
Okay, awesome. I see somebody else said that exact same thing in the chat right as you said it. Anything else from anybody else? And how did you know?
I think the red and the waving.
Okay, great. What else do we think? Okay, well, I'm going to take this silence as maybe us putting ourselves in our disfluent reader's shoes even more. When we aren't able to fluently read the text, sometimes we are left feeling like, I don't feel confident talking about this or sharing out, and we can really think about that with our students too. So this is an excerpt from Old Ironsides by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. And when a student cannot fluently decode, then comprehension is impeded, as we'll see when we actually read the whole poem. So some of you may have been able to make some inferences based on what you could decode. And some of you may have the background knowledge about Old Ironsides to make a good guess. But if you can't fully comprehend the poem unless you can fluently read it. Could I have somebody come off mute and read this quote aloud to us?
I can. Though fluency does not guarantee comprehension, lack of fluency guarantees students will not be able to comprehend text.
Awesome, thank you, Kara. So as we just experienced, when students are not fluent, it greatly impacts comprehension. In the chat or by coming off mute, go ahead and share a word or two about what disfluent reading sounds like when you hear it. Or let's share what disfluent reading sounds like when it's not fluent. Awesome. We know it's choppy. It can sound like the person is being interrupted over and over. They might reread the preceding words to try and get all the way through the sentence a bunch of times. It might sound like they're sounding out the words, each word at a time. We know that it can sound like the phrasing is off, monotone without any expression. And we know that mostly it lacks automaticity as well, and can sound really robotic and labored. Perfect. So fluency is defined by these three characteristics. First is accuracy, accurate decoding and word recognition. As we talked about in our previous session, students need lots of practice with decoding, which we'll see shortly in the older grades also includes a use of word parts, so syllables and morphology, and practice with sight words so that they develop automaticity. We know that automaticity refers to the ability to recognize words automatically or effortlessly. Remember, if we think about the Scarborough rope, as students master the foundational skills, their reading lead becomes increasingly automatic until automaticity is achieved. And that's really what we're going for when we think about accuracy. Rate refers to the speed of oral reading. The goal here is to read with rate that is appropriate to what you're reading. It's not just to read as fast as possible, which sometimes we can fall into the trap of. So read too fast and you'll only get the gist of what you've read and miss the full meaning. And especially as text becomes increasingly complex, that can really happen. And then if we read too slow or haltingly, like what we just chatted about mostly, when short-term memory has trouble remembering what's just been read, even from the beginning of the sentence to the end of the sentence, which can obviously impact comprehension. So the point that I want to drive home here about rate is that students need to read at the just right rate, the range for their grade level, but also understand that different types of texts can require different rates of reading. And in a moment, we'll see how we can determine if a student's rate is appropriate for their grade level. And then finally is prosody, which is reading with the appropriate expression. The primary elements of prosody are appropriate phrasing, pausing briefly, both within and between sentences, stressing certain words or phrases appropriate to context, rising and falling pitch that matches the text. This is what we were thinking of, what Kara chatted out about, sounding like we're talking, phrasing that sounds natural. And as we know, reading with prosody signals that the reader understands what's being read and is making sense of the syntax and context clues. Students without prosody tend to read with a flat voice, which can impact their comfort when being asked to read aloud. So as we talk about fluency so much, we need to think about how we know if students are fluent. And so let's look at some important considerations for assessing fluency. So just like what we've talked about with lots of our foundational skills, and when we think about fluent reading also, fluency checks should be given at the beginning of the year and then as needed throughout the year. Oral reading fluency, which we often see as ORF, measures speed and accuracy. So in order to measure that, students should read aloud from a previously unseen grade level appropriate text for 1 minute to determine words correct per minute. And then we should use nationally verified norms to determine if fluency is grade level appropriate. So one of those is Hasbrook and Tyndall's oral reading fluency norms. And those are really easy to find on Google if you want more information about that. And those norms are provided for fall, winter, and spring of each grade level, so we can see if students are keeping up or if they're still on track. One thing about this is that I sort of mentioned before is it's really important to remember that having average fluency is fine. We're not aiming for creating fast readers. The fastest reader is not the best reader. So a reading rate that supports comprehension is the goal, and an average fluency often does just that. A low words correct per minute score, though, can be a red flag. It can be the result of weakness in decoding, vocabulary, sight words. And so we would then need to do some other diagnostic assessments to determine what the cause for weak fluency is so that we can fill those gaps and get our kids fluently reading. I also want to name that when measuring fluency, it's important to attend to all aspects of fluency, not just one or another, but to really think about all three of those aspects and what the gap is that our students are experiencing. Although prosody can sometimes feel subjective when measuring how well students are reading, there are there are published checklists or rubrics that we can use that will measure expression and volume, phrasing, smoothness, and pace so that it feels like we have something to go off of and we're not just using our feelings about a student to assess them, but we actually have a rubric that we can point to. So we're going to go into our first and only case study of today, and we're going to read our Tale of Two Students, which is in your note catcher. As you're reading, let's reflect on how using data can help us better meet the needs of our students with exact right instruction in terms of fluency. So as you're reading, let's reflect on the two questions that are on the screen. How would have assessing the fluency of the two students in this case study have helped identify their reading strengths and challenges? And then how would the results have impacted the type of support these students would have received? We're going to have about 4 minutes to read to ourselves, and then we'll debrief all together. All right, let's come back together and share out our reflections, either in the chat or by coming off mute. Could you share what you were thinking about when you read the case study? Chrissy, could you come off mute and share a little bit more what you were thinking about when you wrote "seems familiar"?
Just thinking this is something that I've seen in just about every classroom. So this is a familiar predicament, I would imagine, for all of us.
Yeah, I think that when we think about our older grade levels, we can see these types of gaps with our students for sure, especially the ones who are struggling to read. How do we think assessing fluency of these two students in the case study would have helped identify their reading strengths and challenges? That question could be for anybody.
Well, I'd say just starting off, just assessing it alone sends that message to students and everybody that it's important. And honestly, for several years, probably going back 10, 15 years, there's been plenty of messaging that has said that fluency isn't as important as I think we all naturally knew it was. And I think you have the moment a teacher has just even the basic assessment of fluency in front of them with a kiddo, they learn so much pretty darn quick about what that kid needs. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the point, or sort of hitting the nail on the head there with this session and also the previous ones. When we assess our students, we know what their gaps are, and we naturally begin to teach them to fill those gaps, both in just what we're looking out for when they're learning and by picking the right things to practice and the right things to teach them. So we would have, this teacher probably with the second student would have seen that she's having a really hard time decoding. She probably has some of those foundational skills from the earlier grades that we need to fill the gaps on. With the first student, he's really struggling with prosody, and we need to work on that, which we know we can fill that gap pretty quickly if we're targeting the right skills. So if you take anything away from this whole series, it would be just that. When we assess and use our data, we can really pinpoint the exact gaps students have and fill their gaps more quickly. Awesome. So let's take a look at some of the different types of fluency practice that can be used to support these striving readers. In many cases, poor fluency can be strengthened by fluency work alone with just some specific coaching around phonetic knowledge as needed. So modeling and practicing fluency with grade level text feels more authentic and appropriate for older readers especially. So when we're doing this fluency practice, it's really important to remember to use grade level appropriate texts. Don't bring them down to earlier grades or easier texts. It's really important that we use those grade level connected texts. If possible, use connected, meaningful texts for authentic practice. So if you're teaching with a unit or with a theme, or if you know they're learning something in science, try and use something that's connected to what they're already learning. And then, especially for our older readers, being sensitive to a student's social and emotional well-being is super important. We know that as readers get older and they are still struggling with fluency, it can become embarrassing and to read aloud or to be always in the low group. And so really thinking about how to do this work in a social, emotionally intelligent way is really, really important. So here are some strategies to support and practice oral reading fluency. For practice, oral reading is an important element of the exercises. It's important for teachers and students to hear students read aloud. These fluency practices involve oral reading. So even though as we get older, we think reading should be done in our brains, for oral reading fluency, we need to practice out loud. We're going to briefly explore 4 strategies for building oral fluency, which are repeated oral reading, choral reading, partner reading, and reader's theater. You can find lots of information about these strategies and other strategies in the fluency guides that can be found on Unbounded's website. And it's also linked in your note catcher. So we are going to get to practice some of these strategies together today, which will be super fun. This would be more fun if we were in person together, but we are just gonna pretend like we are and put ourselves in our teacher and student shoes. So first, we're going to practice modeled reading. In your note catcher, go ahead and flip to Old Ironsides in your note catcher. I'm gonna play just a recording of Old Ironsides, and while we're doing this exercise, it's important that we read along as we hear the model of the fluent reading. This allows the students to hear fluent reading while they are looking at the phonics patterns in the text. It also allows for a better initial understanding of the text. So I'm going to go ahead and play that for us now. As it starts, go ahead and give me a thumbs up just to make sure that y'all can hear what's playing through my computer.
Old Ironsides by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. I tear her tattered ensign down.
A little louder.
See that banner in the sky. Beneath it run the battle shout and loose the cannon's roar. The meteor of the ocean air shall speak of its no more. To death once ran the cannon's blood.
I don't know if I'm the only one who can't hear it, but I can't hear it very well.
No, I can't hear it well either. Thanks, Elka. And good morning.
Good morning, Will. I just know it's because I'm old.
Probably not because you're old. It's probably because of technology. I wasn't sure if that was going to work, but I was hoping it would. In any case, we're going to pretend that we heard that entire recording of Old Ironsides and read along as we were listening to it. The next thing we would do, let me just put this back on full screen again. The next strategy that we could use is choral reading. So we would read the whole text aloud together. One thing I've learned by facilitating sessions and teaching students over Zoom is that it doesn't work very well for us all to come off mute together because it just sounds like we're all reading different things at different times, and that is like a panic attack to me. That sounds terrible. So we are going to practice this by reading to our out loud as much all together as we can while staying on mute. I will read aloud with my voice on. So let's just try and stay together. We're just going to read the first stanza all together. So I'm going to say 1, 2, ready, read, and then we'll all read together. Okay. All right. 1, 2, ready, read. I tear her tattered inside down, long has it waved on high, and many an eye has danced to see that banner in the sky. Beneath it rung the battle shout and burst the cannon's roar. The meteor of the ocean air shall sweep the clouds no more. Thank you for playing along with that. So if we were in our classroom with our 3rd grade readers, we would read that whole thing all together. The advantages of choral reading is that it again proves as an additional model read. It also provides an opportunity for immediate assistance for struggling readers. And it's important that any praise or correction that's provided is provided to the entire class. So no one is singled out for their reading out loud. In your note catcher, there's also some more tips that we can look at in just a bit about the choral read. And then the last strategy that we're going to do all together is an echo read. And that's where the teacher reads one sentence or one phrase, and then the class reads that sentence or phrase back. So the advantage to echo reading, besides providing another opportunity for repeated reading or for hearing fluent reading, is that it helps students chunk or segment the text into logical phrases or sentences. So I'm going to read a sentence, you'll read the sentence back. We'll just do that first stanza again. And we'll probably just do the first bit of it. So here we go. I tear her tattered inside down, long has it waved on high. And many an eye has danced to see that banner in the sky. Awesome. Thank you for playing along where I was the teacher, you were the students. It's always fun to be a teacher again, so I enjoyed it. So now let's take a minute to also review the protocols for repeated reading and partner reading, which are in your note catcher on page 5. Let's just take a minute to read over those protocols, and you can also read the additional information about the 3 strategies we just used in this minute. All right, and then the next type of fluency practice that I wanted to call out here is performance reading. So at the end of the week, students can perform the text they've practiced all week with some of the methods we just described. In the performance, the text can be divided into parts for each reader and is read aloud. It's important to note here that the text is read and not memorized. I know sometimes when we think about readers theater or what a play looks like, we know that students should be performing, but remember here, the whole point of this is fluent reading. So they really need to be reading the text out loud. This is a great way to build confidence and self-efficacy in readers. We can invite parents in when COVID is over so that they can hear their children read too, which can be just a huge pride moment for them. In some curriculums like CKLA, I know that there are readers theater passages embedded in the curriculum, and so those can be really great to use too. So in 3rd grade through 5th grade, we know we need to continue regularly providing these opportunities for our students. We can do that with any of those activities we just experienced and read about, so that we can continue to develop fluency in our readers. Achieve the Core also provides fluency packets for grade bands. So today's passage, Old Ironsides, is from an Achieve the Core fourth through fifth grade band fluency packet. Each of those packets provides enough passages for 1 week, a protocol for daily fluency practice, information for supporting English language learners, opportunities for performance, and then work with vocabulary and sentence structures. So we don't have time to really explore those in our session today, but there are links to both the Unbounded resources and these Achieve the Core resources in your note catcher. So let's look at improving automaticity in decoding. Sometimes students need more intensive support with their decoding skills in order to improve their automaticity. It's important to understand the progression of the skills across the grades to identify where to begin to support students. So give me a thumbs up if you are familiar with the 4-part processing model for word recognition, which is the model that we see on our screen over here. Give me a thumbs up if you've ever seen that before. Cool. I see kind of a mixed bag here. Some of us have seen this, some of us have not. We are going to really quickly go over it. It relates really closely to the models we've already talked about. So, most of this language should sound familiar. So in the first session, remember, we discussed word recognition requires connecting print to speech, which is the work of the orthographic and the phonological processors at the grapheme level. However, as students progress in their learning of phonics, this work is also done at the syllable and morpheme levels of language. So an understanding of morphology, which is the study of meaningful units of language and how those units are combined in word formation and syllabication, or breaking words apart into their syllables, builds students' decoding and language comprehension skills. However, it's often overlooked in foundational skills instruction, and as a result, many students struggle when they encounter multisyllabic words. We know that this is problematic when we reflect on the results of one study, which indicates that 5th grade level texts have more than 90% of words are multisyllabic. So students really need a firm understanding of morphology and syllabication to be able to decode those words with automaticity. Let's take a look at how phonics skills progress across the grades to better understand how the expectations grow as students enter the intermediate grades. So we're going to go into our one breakout session of the day in just a minute. And we are going to look in our note catcher at the 3rd grade through 5th grade word analysis standards on page 6. As you're reading, start thinking about the questions on the slide. How do the expectations stay the same across grade levels? How do they change? And how would the understanding of this progression of skills help teachers support their older striving readers? We'll have time to discuss in our breakout rooms, and then we'll come back together to briefly share out. So I'm going to give you a minute just to read here, and then we'll head into our breakout rooms. All right, so as I open up our rooms, You've got the standards on page 6. Our questions that we're discussing are right below the standards. And then we'll come back together in about 5 minutes to share out some of our key takeaways. All right, we are all back. Could I have a person or two come off mute and share your reflections to one or some of our questions? All right, why don't we have somebody from the first group where you're all in one school together? Can you share your reflections from our questions?
I don't know which group I was in. I think
That's
other
okay.
people might have the same problem.
We were in 2.
Okay, then I'm in 2, so I'll be quiet.
If you want to let them off the hook, that's fine though. As long as we get somebody's voice into the room sharing what y'all talked about.
We were trying to figure out how to talk and not have echoing, so that's why there was a slight pause there.
Well, I can jump in then. So I have to be honest. So I work with the Nebraska Department of Education. I'm the reading specialist, for those of you that don't know. And we're in the process of revising the ELA standards. And so I sort of, when I look at these, I sort of cringe because they're so much better. The new ones are going to be so much better. They really, instead of calling it just word analysis, now we call it phonics and word analysis. And so it really, the new standards really break down phonics. So when you're looking at that poem, I was thinking about that. If you're looking at that poem and you see where students are not reading a word accurately, you can start to analyze where within their phonics development there's a breakdown, and you'll be able to align it better to this standards. So right now in the standards, it says, if we talk about one of those questions, how do the expectations change across grade levels? It simply says it depends on the text complexity by grade level. Well, we've broken it down even more, so it better aligns with the science of reading and better aligns with the phonics progression that we know that the scope and sequence that we know that students need to have in order to develop into fluent readers. So it sort of derails the conversation, but I think it helps in some ways to know that, to highlight that there is a scope and sequence for phonics, and our standards didn't quite capture that as well as they could have. And also allows us to know the most current research on the scope and sequence of phonics and what's developmentally appropriate. So Becca, you're welcome to just kick me out of this room if I just derailed everything.
No, it's no worries. I think that's actually really helpful that when we know, and I think it's really helpful for you coming from the Department of Education to recognize that for everybody. Like, we know better now, we are doing better now. This is going to be a better resource for our teachers and our school leaders to be able to pinpoint the gaps that our students have by simply looking at the standards and seeing where our students, where their knowledge is breaking down and how we can fill in the gaps to help them be better readers, which is the whole point of all of this. So thank you for sharing that. I don't know if this is news to people in the room that the standards are changing or not, but I know that can be met with excitement and anxiety sometimes. Thank you for sharing that out, Abby. All right, and with that, we are going to take another look at a different section of the standard. So I don't know if we're going to have to run into the same thing later, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. All right, so we've just done a ton of work with fluency and word analysis. We're now going to start looking into building meaning through knowledge and vocabulary, which we also know is so incredibly important to understanding the text that we are reading. So if we go back to this 4-part processor once again, we just explored the importance of being able to automatically attach print to speech through lots of direct instruction and practice of the phonics skills taught at the grapheme, syllable, and morpheme levels through the grade. So that's that connecting the orthographic processor to the phonological processor part of this model. Automatic and accurate identification of words, however, is a product of more than just being able to connect print to speech. It also involves attaching meaning to the words that we're reading. So as a reader is decoding the print on the page, the brain is simultaneously simulating your meaning processor to make sense of the word parts, the words, and the phrases. So I know this model shows lots of arrows going back and forth, and that's because all 4 of our processors have to be connected for us to be able to read the words on the page and connect meaning to what we are reading. The breadth and depth of knowledge and vocabulary development impacts the attachment of meaning to the word in order to confirm the word being read. And a reciprocal relationship is there too. So the ability to decode a word with automaticity supports the work of attaching meaning as well. Let's quickly read the recommendation. It's on the next page in your note catcher from the CCSSO. And we are going to chat out some of the words or phrases that stick out the most to us. So how does this quote align to the research snapshots we explored earlier in the session? How does this quote align to instruction at your schools? Go ahead and read the text on the next page, and then we'll chat out our reflections. Let's take about a minute to read. All right, so now that we've had our minute to read the CCSSO recommendation, let's chat out a word or a phrase that stands out to you from the quote.
I like the idea of allowing or providing students with the opportunity to explore independent, I think it said independently explore topics that are of interest to them. I think students, when we provide that opportunity, they can often read at a higher level than something that's, I mean, that's for me too, so.
Yeah, there's research that shows that where students have background knowledge, they can comprehend a text, even if they're a weaker reader, they can comprehend the text better than a stronger reader who doesn't have background knowledge. So yeah, giving text that's connected to their interests, absolutely. I think y'all called out so many of the important parts. Giving kids access to grade level appropriate text, complex grade level appropriate text is essential and key. And especially this year, as we've been taken so out of our comfort zone as human beings, it is so natural for us to just want to go back to the thing that feels comfortable and that we know the best. And so what this quote I think is really calling out is telling us not to do that. We know better than to do that. And so we know that these kids need to be in complex grade level appropriate texts in order to boost their ability to read them and to comprehend them. Okay, so in alignment with that recommendation we just read, CKLA provides a strong example of how a high quality curriculum will systematically build knowledge within and across grades. So I know it's a little bit small on your screen. So if you flip the page in your note catcher, you'll see the CKLA domains of study a little bit bigger. So let's take a look at that image on page 8. In a bit, we're going to look at building vocabulary in ecology in the ecology unit in 3rd grade. So for now, let's look at the grades before 3rd grade. Where do we see topics in kinder, 1st, and 2nd grade that will likely support knowledge and vocabulary to support the learning of ecology in 3rd grade? Go ahead and chat out the topics that you see or come off mute and share them. So for example, if I'm looking at kindergarten, I see the plants unit might, if they're starting to learn vocabulary in the plants unit in kindergarten, that could support them as they get to 3rd grade and get even more specific into ecology. Awesome, yeah, plants and habitats, perfect. What else do we see? All right, we've called out lots of the kindergarten units. What do we see in 1st and 2nd grade that would continue to support our students in their learning in the ecology unit in 3rd grade? Cool, insects, maybe the history of the earth or animals and habitats. Perfect. Really the point here is to see that we're building a vocabulary knowledge, not just starting in 3rd grade or starting in the grade level where our kids are getting the specific unit, but as we build up through the grade levels, it will better enable our students to access the text that we're asking them to read when they get a little bit older. So while topically connected texts build breadth of vocabulary knowledge through exposure to a high volume of connected words, it's also important to build, as we saw in the CKLA example, it's also important to build a depth of vocabulary knowledge. Depth of vocabulary knowledge is built when students see the connections between words that they read across topically connected texts. It can also be built through direct instruction of structure of words and their meaning. So we're going to look at the standards once again. I'm not sure if these are all about to go away, but we're going to use these as an example here because they're what the standards are right now, and we can still learn by looking at them. So while we previously looked at that progression of phonics standards, We're now going to look at these standards, at the language standards. So let's go ahead and read through the standards to understand the guidance they provide for grade level vocabulary instruction. We're going to take 2 minutes, or you know what, let's just take 1 minute to read these standards to ourselves. And as you do, notice the bold words. These words represent what's similar across grades 3 through 5. So I'm sure y'all as school leaders or leaders in your schools are super well versed in all of these standards already. What I really want to summarize for us is that across the grade levels, we see a focus on morphology, so knowledge of word structure and word patterns, as well as known words, context clues, acquiring and applying new vocabulary, semantic relationships, using reference materials to identify and define words. There are, of course, specific nuances to each of these things across grade levels that will be important in informing your vocabulary instruction. But for now, we wanted to highlight the similarities across standards to pinpoint the aspects of vocabulary instruction that are essential across all grade levels. We're gonna further zoom in to understand how the work of standard 3.1.5a can help students know a word by using their knowledge of the structural elements of that word. So we are going to turn the page again on our note catcher and look at this passage from CKLA. We're going to become our striving reader again, the one that we became way earlier, and think about what this reader does when they encounter long words they don't know. Remember, we said that readers skip words, read only part, guess parts, or just avoids reading altogether. So let's take a look at this text from the 3rd grade topic of ecology. We already discussed how breadth of exposure to knowledge and vocabulary in the previous grades supports the understanding of this text. Now let's look at how explicit instruction can also support understanding of the same text. Let's take a minute to read this page in the ecology unit to ourselves. All right, and now that we've had some time to read, chat out 2 words that you identified that are critical to understanding this passage. Good, I see so far we have bacteria, decomposers, decompose. Absolutely. I think if you just quickly glance at the page, those jump out at us and we see them over and over. We know they're important to understand this text. So when we look back at the third grade language standards and identify the standards that most supports the understanding of some of the keywords in this text, we could really identify 3.15a and 3.15b. Identifying word parts through advanced phonics skills and understanding the meaning attached to the parts of the words, which is the work of the vocabulary standards, can help students determine the meaning of the words in the text. It's important the students receive the instruction outlined in the phonics standards in grades in 3rd through 5th grade, as well as the related instruction of the vocabulary standards to support understanding the meaning attached to the parts of the words as well as the whole words. The interconnectedness of the four-part processing system is why word meaning should be explored when students are practicing phonics and decoding skills as well. So here's an example of what this might look like in this semantic mapping. Semantic mapping is one great instructional strategy for building depth of vocabulary knowledge through direct instruction. So let's quickly take a look at the types of connections that can be built for the word decomposer to help students use the structure and meaning of the word parts to deepen their understanding of the word and the text. If we look at the map, we could see we're calling out all of these other words that we see that are connected to the word decomposer, which we're really clearly defining here. We define the word root as well as the prefix and the suffix. We talk about the antonyms. So we are starting to build meaning for more words and help them be able to figure out the meaning on their own. We're also calling out the number of syllables and even breaking the word into its syllables to help them decode the word if they need support with that too. And then just a reminder that the progression matters. So you need to refer to the specific language in your grade level standards to better understand the nuances of the grade level expectations. And then what if you haven't adopted a high quality curriculum? Then we really need to go back to the rope and let that be our guide. If we haven't adopted a high quality phonics curriculum, then we need to know and systematically teach our grade level phonics standards across kinder through 5th grade. We also need to know and teach the vocabulary standards across grades in K through 5. So before we close out and begin to plan for next steps, it's also important to stop and identify the structures that are needed to support this work with striving readers. Go ahead on your own and read the structures that are listed on this slide and reflect in your note catcher. Begin to think about which of these things are in place and which may need to be addressed. No matter your role in the system, you can influence and advocate for the supports that are needed to support our students. So go ahead and read those now and reflect. All right, so that was our what felt like a fast and furious session to me today, with lots of content, hopefully lots of resources that you'll be able to take into your school and share with your teachers as just, here is something that we can use right now, right away, which as a teacher, I know I always loved, and so hopefully they'll appreciate that too. So as we wrap up today, and we really wrap up our 4-part series, we're going to take a couple of minutes to independently reflect on what's happening in your school and where we want to go with this. So we're going to take about 3 minutes on our own to look in your note catcher, reflect on these questions that are on our slide, just to make notes to yourself as you go back into your school, go back to your team. What do you really want to take back with you? And where do you want this work to live in your school? So let's take 3 minutes on our own. I like what Kathy, or maybe Ilka, I'm not sure who, called out here about thinking about the mindset shifts that are going to have to shift in maybe our teachers, maybe fellow admin team members, when we shift away from some of these things like leveled reading programs to more grade level reading materials, and really a focus on foundational skills as we think about filling in gaps for our struggling readers K-5. And before we close out, Kathy, did you want to speak to that a little bit, or Ilka, did you want to speak to that a little bit more?
Actually, Kathy and I have been texting about it, so.
Both of you.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, and it might just be our school, but I know that we have really committed to guided reading for the last 20 years, let's say. So that's a lot of time to get into that mindset, and I'm one of those people. So, but I have heard lots of speakers, talk about this, challenging our students to read grade level material, and I think being a CSI school has really helped clarify that. So, but just because just because we're there, we're not the ones in the classroom teaching that. And so, yeah, I think I think for our district, this is a really important topic to continue to help teachers and teacher leaders grapple with and
Mhm.
address. So.
Yeah, I feel you 100%. I think when I started teaching reading, I was trained in the reading and writing workshop with Teachers College, and I went all in on guided reading too. And really just reading the research has sort of opened my eyes to, and thinking about my own experience of, I always had these struggling readers who I just couldn't really seem to reach, and why. And so I need to do something differently. It really opened my eyes to that. And I think there's a lot of really great articles, like even in the New York Times and in newspapers and things like this, that really help us see this isn't a problem that just I'm experiencing. This is a big problem that a lot of people are experiencing, and there's a lot of research out there now pointing us in a different direction. I also see that Abby put her email in the chat as a resource from NDE, so please take her up on that. And I'll put my email in the chat too as we get out of here today, in case you have questions for me or want access to some materials or things that you think I might have. You're welcome to reach out to me. Before we go, I really wanted to thank y'all for engaging in this 4-part learning series. I learned so much from y'all and had a really great time getting to know you across these 4 sessions. And so thank you so much for being here. Your teachers and leaders are so lucky to have leaders that are willing to invest their time in learning more and having a growth mindset about what's working in your schools, what is challenging in your schools, and working to get even better. So thank you so much for being here. Here's the link to our survey that I would love for you to fill out before you get out of here. And then